Hi YouTube, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today we have the same new camera setup that we're trying out. Hopefully you guys like it. But today I want to talk about the second of the two topics that I mentioned that I've been getting a lot of questions about on Instagram and Tumblr, and I literally have no idea where this question has started coming from, because I used to never get this question. Like the first year maybe that I was doing YouTube videos, I almost never got questions about this, and then during my live stream after I started my Tumblr, I got like 4 different questions about it, and honestly, I was a little bit surprised. But today, we are going to be talking about switching. Now, full disclosure, I'm not a switch, my partner is not a switch, but I know plenty of people who do switch. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about what a switch is, different types of switching, what it means to be a switch in a relationship, different relationships, dynamics, and how to deal with that as a switch, and sort of how to communicate and what an actual good, healthy switch type relationship looks like. And we're kind of just going to be going over all of it. So hopefully you guys find this video helpful, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing and the most important thing for this whole video is, what is a switch? A switch is somebody who alternatively can take the form of both a top or a bottom, or less commonly, both a submissive and a dominant. So this is somebody who can both give and receive power, as well as giving and receiving pain, or giving or receiving bondage, or whatever it happens to be in a top-bottom relationship, or in a dominant submissive type relationship. Different switches have different ways of switching. What I mean by that is there are some switches who are strictly dominant with some people, and they only are ever that person's dominant, but they're submissive, and they're only ever submissive with that person. So you have a very consistent relationship. So for example, if my partner were a switch, he would be a dominant with me, and we would only ever be in a dominant submissive relationship, but he could be a submissive for somebody else, or he could be a bottom for somebody else, but he would only ever be that person's bottom, or only ever be that person's submissive. And I think there's a lot more stability to that type of relationship. I think more commonly, especially when people are first discovering BDSM, when they're younger, a lot of times what ends up happening is people aren't really sure if they're a top or a bottom, or a submissive or a dominant, and so even with the same person, they will switch between the two depending on their mood, how they're feeling that day, how their partner is acting or dressing. It really can vary a lot. Some people will be a dominant with their partner for a day at a time. Some people will be dominant with their partner for weeks or months at a time, and then they might suddenly decide they want to be a submissive for a couple of days or for a full week and then go back. The preference that a switch has between being a dominant or a submissive or a bottom or a top varies depending on the particular person. I know someone who is a switch, but they tend to bottom, so they are a bottom-leaning switch, although they do occasionally top for the right person or the right types of scenes or different types of scene energy. I know other people who are almost always dominant, but very occasionally they will bottom for somebody else, usually to try out a new skill or something like that, and that may or may not be considered switching, but it is sort of up to your own personal definitions and how you see yourself as a person. You could consider yourself a switch even if you've only ever in your entire life ever submitted to one person, and you've been a dominant for like 12 other people. It's really up to you to decide whether or not you're a switch and what kind of label you want to give yourself. But as people get older, men tend to stay dominant. They don't tend to also become bottoms as time comes on, but there's very often times when females who started out as submissives or started out as any other kind of S-type get more confident, they obtain more skills, they have more partners. They might not become a dom in the proper sense, but they could become a top, and they could obtain a lot of the skills of a top and have scenes where they have the dominant partner. And I think that's something that maybe not a lot of people get exposure to, but it is perfectly valid, and I don't feel that people should be beholden to one label throughout all of their time as a kinkster. Like, the first time you discover kink, you don't need to decide right now, then and there, that you're going to be a switch for the rest of your life, or that you're going to be a dominant for the rest of your life, or what have you. And you should just really feel free to be whatever you are and assign whatever label to yourself you think best identifies your role, and is a great way to communicate with potential partners where you sort of fall on things. I think being a switch shares a lot of same issues within the BDSM community as being bisexual does in the LGBT community. And the reason why is there's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of times, gay men or lesbians won't want to date a bisexual because they are worried that that person is going to end up preferring the opposite gender to the same gender eventually, that they're going to leave for another person. There's generally just a lot of uncertainty and fear around a bisexual who wants to date a lesbian, and the lesbian feeling like, oh, well, like, you're really just gonna leave me for a man, and, you know, bisexual means you can't decide between the two, and yada yada, and there's all this baggage about it. I'm not personally bisexual, although my friend Brittany is, and I'm sure she has a ton of videos about that, and I will link them down below if you want to watch them. And I think being a switch is very similar, because if you come to somebody and you are a switch and you get into a relationship with somebody who is, for example, very strictly a submissive, it can be very fearful for them. It can be very uncertain for them, because they want a sense of stability. They want to know that somebody's going to be able to be their dominant or be their top in a consistent way. And if you periodically wake up also feeling submissive and they really, really need an impact scene, they're going to feel kind of left out, and it can put you in a bad situation. It can put them in a bad situation, and it's not good. I think the best way as a switch sort of confront that and prevent that fear is when you're starting that relationship to be very, very clear up front about what the expectations for that relationship are. You know, you could say, you know, I'm a switch, but that means that I'm dominant with some people and submissive with others. I don't tend to change with the same person, and with you, I feel very dominant, but I don't expect myself to ever want to submit to you, and that can add a level of comfort. If you are the kind of person who wants to switch between being a dominant and being a submissive, or a top and a bottom with the same person, you need to be very upfront about that. That way they can cope with that. Don't present like you're only ever going to be a top with that person and then suddenly decide you want to switch with them when there's never been something you've previously discussed. That's just bad etiquette. Don't do it. And it's also going to give you a reputation in the community, which, if you want future play partners, is not something that you should be interested in doing. Now, something that a lot of people have problems with, particularly as a switch, is not always being a switch with a dominant partner or being a switch with a submissive partner, because I think there's a good way to negotiate for that. I think a lot of people in BDSM are very open to different types of relationships or going into filling their needs with other partners if you happen to not be able to be that person for them all the time. It's when there are two switches put together that things get really complicated, because again, there are so many different types of ways to switch. She could have two switches together, and one switch could be of the type where they're dominant with some people and submissive with others, and then you could have a person who is a switch but is bottom leaning but occasionally does want to top the same person. And it gets very difficult to negotiate with that because you have so many different moving parts. When you're dealing with a relationship where somebody is strictly dominant and the other person is strictly a submissive, you know what your roles are. The problem in that relationship is generally not going to be, you know, they can't decide or they don't know if they want to be a submissive or a dominant. That's already been discussed. That's already been decided. But when you're a switch, those things can change pretty rapidly. And I do mean rapidly. I know people, and I think my sir has used this example in some of his, you know, live streams with us before or on our podcast or things like that. But we know a couple, and they are both bottom-leaning switches, and they switch with each other. So sometimes you'll have a scene set up where one of them will be the dominant, one of them will be the submissive, and one of them will be like whipping them, being like, oh, you're such a bad girl, and one of them will be like, oh yeah, like hit me harder or whatever. But as soon as one of them brats, as soon as the submissive brats a little bit, that top energy is just gone, and then suddenly they're both submissives, and it can be a mess. And I'm not saying that's necessarily common, but it does happen, and that's one of the difficulties that being a switch and a two-switch relationship can present. And the unfortunate thing is that, again, because of that uncertainty that a lot of people feel around being in a relationship with a switch, it can be hard to find somebody who is going to be able to be consistently submissive or consistently dominant to be a partner with, because they would rather be with people who are like them, who are consciously and continually always going to be fulfilling the same roles. I know somebody who asked me a question, I think it was through Instagram maybe, or Tumblr, and they have a partner who is a switch, and they're kind of a switch as well, but they generally feel uncomfortable fulfilling the top role too much. And they have found that their partner is a bottom-leaning switch like they are, and they feel very uncomfortable fulfilling the top role as frequently as they are. you need to talk to your partner about that kind of thing. If you're in a switch relationship and you feel like you're topping or you're bottoming more than you want to, or you're being forced into situations where you have to take on the top role suddenly by your other half, that's not good. You need to make sure you have good communication around that and make sure you talk about that in depth, that if it's something that really bothers you, you can say like, you know, I really value our relationship. I enjoy the scenes that we have together, but I feel a little bit worn out by topping so much. I would feel more comfortable if, you know, I didn't top as much as I am now, or I would be open to the idea of you having, you know, relationships with other people or scenes with other people for times when you did want to get some of your bottom needs fulfilled. But I just don't feel like I can be the top that you need me to be as often as you need me to be. Something along those lines. You really just need to be able to talk to people. Like, that is kind of one of the morals that I have across all of my videos, is just good communication, talking with your partner, hashing out the details, like especially in BDSM. Talking about details can be difficult, but you need to do it. So that way you can prevent uncomfortable situations and barriers in communication, especially, again, if you're a switch and you're not getting your needs fulfilled, or you feel like you are being put upon by your partner to fulfill a role more than you're comfortable with. Now, earlier I mentioned that we know a couple, my sir and I know a couple, that they're both bottom-leaning switches, and occasionally they have switched in scene. This is generally not a good idea. The only reason they're able to do it with each other is they've been together for a really long time, like years and years and years. So for them, they've negotiated that, they know what to expect, they know the change in body language and everything to be able to kind of flow between and in and out of roles very naturally. But if you're in a new relationship with somebody, or if you're just switching in general, don't just switch on somebody in the middle of the scene. That's not cool, man. If you've negotiated for a scene where, like, yeah, you're gonna like tie me up, and then you're gonna like beat me, and then I'm gonna dress up like a schoolgirl and yada yada. Like, if you negotiated for that, and then halfway through that scene you're being tied up, you brat out of that rope and decide you want to dominate the other person, don't do it. Don't do it. If you think that you might want to switch during a scene, talk about that, figure out how to incorporate that in a safe way to do it. That way nobody is surprised or like has to call red in the middle of a scene because, whoa, all of a sudden my submissive is trying to dominate me. Like, that's going to throw off the whole energy, and it's not going to be a good time. Like, just in general, it's not going to be a good time for anybody involved. There is something that is sort of a solution to this, and if you are switches who don't have a preference between being a top or being a bottom, or you're both top leaning switches in particular, you can have what's known as a switch fight. And that is basically where you spend the first part of the scene, or it could be a scene all on its own, fighting it out and figuring out who has the right to be dominant for the rest of the scene. And this can be a very, very fun way to sort of solve a lot of the problems and anxieties that revolve around being in a two-switch relationship, or being unsure of your general hierarchy in the relationship. And it's just a hell of a lot of fun. So yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to talk about with switches today, guys. Hopefully you found this information helpful, useful, applicable. Again, I am not a switch, and I have very limited information about switching, either that I've seen or I have personal knowledge of, so take everything with a grain of salt. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, comments, stories, feel free to put that down below in the comments. If you have any questions, video suggestions, things like that, I'm always happy to take video suggestions from people, which you can also do in the comment section down below. If you want to find my social media, my Patreon, different ways to support this channel, you can do so by clicking the links down in the description box below. But until I see you next time, have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.